Great news after the national championship game last night. Nebraska lost to Ohio State by the least amount of points out of anybody. It's time to celebrate next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first drive to the final whistle, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Head to FanDuel.com to get started.
Okay, welcome in on this frigid Nebraska Tuesday. It is January 21st. The college football season is over. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. On Monday night, Ohio State beat Notre Dame 34-23. The Buckeyes raced to a 24-point lead and held off a rally. The Irish missed a fourth quarter field goal, got burned deep in man coverage on 3rd and long by Will Howard and Jeremiah Smith with 2 minutes to play, and that was basically all she wrote. So before we talk about what this means for college football, for Nebraska, for the Big Ten, for everybody, Connor, where are you today? You sound and look slightly different.
Yeah, first of all, well, apologies for that. I didn't bring the full complement of equipment that I usually use for this podcast. It's quite the traveling show, to get this thing up. But I'm in also very cold, -6 Chicago, Illinois, traveling with the Creighton basketball team as they played DePaul tonight. My dear friend and colleague, John Bishop, got sick over the weekend, and so I'm stepping in for him. And so I'm just wasting away in a hotel room in Chicago right now before a 8 o'clock tip tonight against DePaul.
Well, first, everybody listen to Connor on 1620 on the Creighton broadcast tonight. If you're a Nebraska basketball fan, do the right thing and listen to Connor call the Creighton DePaul game tonight. Support Connor. So that's awesome. Congrats to you for being on the call, and sorry for the circumstances. I heard John in a highlight or a low light, perhaps, with the post-game interview after Creighton knocked off UConn over the weekend, and he was out there in stores, and it sounded like he needed some relief.
And he's usually not the kind of guy who would ever be like, no, I'm sick. It usually takes him a while to sort of admit it. So when I got a correspondence from him very shortly after the UConn game on Saturday, it wasn't going well. It wasn't
interesting.
Going well,
Interesting how the trip that he ducked out of, though, is the one where it's several degrees below zero. So enjoy. I hope you have a great time in Chicago, and body parts don't freeze while you're there trying to get from your hotel to the arena.
Nope, my plan is to not step foot outside the entire weekend, and almost we had to wait for an Uber from the airport, but the arena is attached to the hotel via Skywalk, so I'm not going outside the rest of the whole thing. It's great.
All right. Let's get back to college football. So Monday night, start with Ryan Day. For Ryan Day, a reprieve. Ohio State fans will now accept him. He still needs to beat Michigan, though.
He does still need to beat Michigan.
It does not matter that he won a national championship.
So, Mitch, he gets to keep his job now, right? We're good?
He gets to keep his job as long as he wants to keep his job. It looks like the Chicago Bears there where you are have found a coach. So the Dallas Cowboys are still looking for a coach, correct? I think there are some other franchises out there in the NFL that are looking for a coach. Do we think Ryan Day, after this playoff run, there are a lot of NFL teams that are envious of the job, that are probably admiring the job that Ryan Day did with the Ohio State Buckeyes to roll off 4 wins in the way that he did. I mean, the college postseason now looks a lot like the NFL postseason, and Ryan Day's roster looks a lot more like an NFL roster than any other roster in college football. So, yeah, I think Ohio State fans want him back. The question is, does he fully want to be back, and would he look at an NFL offer?
Oh, it's really intriguing. I mean, he's been through a lot over the last month or so now. I guess it's 2 months since they lost to Michigan. And
Right, almost.
the thing was, hey, you have to, if you lose this playoff game at home, like I actually believed it. I actually thought that he would get fired if they had lost to Tennessee, a game that you were at, Mitch, which feels like it was 2 months ago now, and it was. And so they won that game convincingly. They won their next game convincingly over the team that they lost to, Oregon, and then they won their next game convincingly as well. So, I mean, it's and I guess one more in between that. So they've gone on a pretty
Texas, yeah,
they've gone on a pretty astounding run here. So I think he's good, but you don't shake it. Like once that happens, and people, people start to get on you about that kind of stuff, and he's had a really tough time beating Michigan. That doesn't go away. It goes in the background for a little while, but it's all going to crop right up. You still have to play Michigan every year, so maybe he wants to just get away from that. Yeah, maybe he could go somewhere where he is, appreciated or whatever. At the same time, he's got one of the best situations in the country. He's just got to deal with a little heat.
I do fully believe around Columbus, Ohio, and I was there twice this year on game weekends and got a sense of how that community works. I do fully believe that through this offseason, he will be equally known for what happened in 2024 as the coach who won the national championship and the coach who lost again to Michigan. There is not one that's more important or less important than the other. They are of equal importance to Ohio State fans. And if he had lost last night or anywhere else in the playoff, then the Michigan defeat would have been more important and a bigger deal than anything that happened in the CFP.
He had to do exactly what he did, right?
Yeah.
He had to win the national championship.
That was a must. Yeah. So for the Big Ten, back-to-back national championships, Michigan, of course, won it last year before Jim Harbaugh bolted to the Chargers. So there's a precedent there for a Big Ten coach to win the national championship and leave for the NFL. Back-to-back, the SEC has been nowhere to be found, even in the national championship game the past 2 years. For Ohio State, it's its first title since 2014. But for the Big Ten, is this a moment to celebrate?
Well,
do you celebrate Ohio State's greatness?
I don't know. Like, I think I approach this differently than certainly SEC fans do. I think many Big Ten fans do. But even that, like, I've just always viewed Ohio State as a separate entity. Like, I don't want to get into the game where I sound like the SEC and I'm like, hey, look at the Big Ten. They've won, X amount of all the success. I shouldn't say all of it, because like you said, Michigan won a title last year. Most of the Big Ten success at that level has come from Ohio State, and they just operate a little bit differently than everyone else in the Big Ten. They operate differently than all but probably about 3 or 4 teams around the country. They have, like an insane amount of money at their fingertips, the best everything, the best roster. And it's just, can you put the pieces together to win a national championship? And that's not like, that's not how Nebraska operates. That's not how even Michigan operates. So I don't give the Big Ten credit for it. They're in the Big Ten conference, a conference that they didn't win, notably. So I think there's that, but I just can't bring myself to do that. It seems disingenuous to me. Like I just don't, that's not where I'm at.
I think your feelings are shared. I feel like last year was much more of a moment to plant the flag for the Big Ten when Michigan did it. And it's not like Michigan is every man in the Big Ten. The Wolverines are elite as a program in their own right. But it had been a while for the Big Ten before the Wolverines did it last year. And it was Michigan, not Ohio State. So I'm with you. I don't think this is a moment for the Big Ten programs not named Ohio State to get excited about what the league accomplished last night. I don't think it means a whole lot for teams in the Big Ten that Ohio State has done this. It doesn't necessarily, well, okay, maybe in one sense it lends more credence to the league as that equal of the SEC, but I don't know that we were in a place where that was even questioned before Monday night.
Right.
And really, it's all about Ohio State. It's all about Ohio State and the depth of talent that it has been able to assemble, rather than what the Big Ten has done for the Buckeyes.
You know what would have been a better thing and a more applicable thing for the Big Ten at large, if Notre Dame won. Like Notre Dame.
You're not lying. I mean, the Notre Dame, elite in its own right, like Michigan, at least has some things that it shares, like DNA wise, with the Big Ten, maybe even more than, in some ways, absolutely more than Ohio State.
Right. That's kind of the point, right? Like they represent a little bit closer to the everyman in the conference, and Ohio State is in that same conference, but they look a little bit different. So I don't think anybody would have put it that way. It's certainly not a notch of a win for the Big Ten if Notre Dame beats the top Big Ten team in the championship. But I think it's like maybe more so than splitting it into conferences these days. We're talking about the elites versus the trying to get there. And if Notre Dame wins that game last night, it's a big win for the trying to get there crew.
I don't know how Indiana and Purdue would feel about that, if they would agree with your statement. But I mean, if you're Penn State or you're Nebraska or you're Wisconsin and you see Ohio State go down against Notre Dame on Monday night, do you feel more hopeful on Tuesday morning because the Irish did that than knowing that you have to contend with Ohio State again next year and that the Buckeyes are just going to come back as a different version of the same program in 2025? I think there's a good case to be made for that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Okay. Let's take a break here. We'll come back and ask what this means for Nebraska.
Absolutely.
Who is a Big Ten team? All right.
It means
what
something.
Does it mean for Nebraska?
It definitely means something.
But first, I'd like to tell you about our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. It's the perfect thing for this time of year. We have 3 NFL games left, unless you're interested in betting on the NFL All-Star game, which I probably wouldn't recommend to you. The FanDuel app, it's easy to navigate. The variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid out instantly. No waiting around for your winnings or anything like that. Whether you're betting on your favorite team, hopefully they're still alive, or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Head to FanDuel.com and join today. And once again, when you join today, you're going to get started with a nice little base, $300 in bonus bets. That's at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, welcome back. Mitch Sherman, Connor Happer with you here on this very, very cold Tuesday, the frozen tundra. Man, we had snow games all across the NFL this past weekend, Mitch. We had a lot of dome games in college football. I love a good snow game, I'll tell you that.
It's snowing in the South. It's snowing right now along the I-10 corridor from New Orleans into Mississippi and even I think the Florida Panhandle, South Georgia. So I don't know what is going on. We've had no snow, some flurries while you were traveling to Illinois. Had some flurries in the Omaha area on Monday, but it amounted to nothing. So I'm kind of over this. Like, if you're going to give me the cold, give me a little bit of snow.
Why not just
don't give it to South Georgia?
And it makes for an incredible football playing environment. Those NFL divisional round games this weekend were awesome.
Yes, I had a family member who lives in Southern California that I heard from some other family members was disgusted by the environment that the Rams were sent to play in Philadelphia, saying this was not fair and they should have moved the game. They should be more considerate than to play football in the snow with a team from Los Angeles coming in. I don't believe that that's the sentiment of a whole lot of people. We're talking about a small minority of Rams fans here, but Yeah, it was great. It was great to watch, and it definitely contributed to what was the moment of the weekend when Mark Andrews, the Baltimore Ravens tight end, slips and falls and drops the ball on the 2-point conversion from Lamar Jackson. So give us some of that in the Big Ten. Like, we want that. The Big Ten, the season's longer. We've got home playoff games going on. Like, give us what they got in the NFL divisional round in Philly and Buffalo over the last weekend.
Yeah, it just shows you that it's doable, right? Okay, so speaking of Nebraska, Ohio State winning the national championship. We just talked about sort of what it means for the Big Ten, if it means anything. I think it's notable, and this is one of the things that I like to commit to memory before every Nebraska football season, like months in advance. Does Nebraska play Ohio State or not in 2025? And the answer is or not. Which is a good thing for them. Now, Ohio State will be a little bit, actually quite a bit different next year, but they're still going to be Ohio State.
Different in terms of the personnel, the same in terms of the talent and the depth of it and the money spent to acquire it. Julian Sayin maybe an upgrade over Will Howard, at least by the middle or the end of the season next year at quarterback for Ohio State. He was the 5-star freshman who redshirted this year in Columbus and scared away some other 5-star freshmen. It looks like it's going to be Julian Sayin's show to run. Saw him on the sidelines last night, but Will Howard had a great game. Was it 1 point 12 for 12? The Buckeyes could not miss on third down, but in some ways, with Jeremiah Smith back, this offense is going to be just as potent as it was. So Nebraska, let's get now 16 minutes into the show into talking about what we promised at the beginning, what this means for Nebraska. Nebraska played the national champs within 4 points on the Buckeyes home field in October. Ohio State then turned around and beat 4 college football playoff opponents by a total of 70 points, aside from its 2 losses this year, which were by 1 and 3 points. That 21-17 win against Nebraska was Ohio State's smallest margin, and it was its smallest margin of victory overall, period, since it beat Notre Dame by 3 in September of 2023. So does this mean anything for Nebraska moving forward that it played Ohio State within 4 points?
I mean, I don't think so from the outside, but I think if you're a Nebraska football player, you're looking at that and saying, wow, I mean, are we really that far away? Like, the answer is yes. You're not 4 points away from a national championship because there's a lot of steps that you have to get through to get there. But I think you could use it as like somewhat of a tangential motivation, something like that. But and I think it's a really good example of what Ohio State, ended up becoming at the end of the year was a whole heck of a lot different from what they were in the middle and then at the end of the regular season, that's for sure. But I don't know. You could we do this all the time in sports, whether it's truthful or not. There's takeaways from results like that you could take with you for a long time.
Nebraska doesn't have to view this in the way that Ohio State views this, in the way that people nationally view it, the way that everyone outside of the Nebraska purview is going to look at this. They're going to say Ohio State's offensive line was a mess in October. It had lost its starting left tackle, didn't really have an answer. It found an answer when it got into November. Take that Michigan game out of the equation. I think that was more just it was it was a mess. Right, their head case against the Wolverines, and didn't even try to do a lot of the things that we saw Ohio State do during its CFP run. But Ohio State was 1 for 10 on third down conversions against Nebraska. We saw how upset Marcus Freeman, the Notre Dame coach, was as he walked off the field at the end of the first half, talking with ESPN about Notre Dame not being able to stop Ohio State on third down. And part of the problem is it just couldn't get to Will Howard. Nebraska had no problem getting to Will Howard because Ohio State's offensive line was a much different challenge than what Notre Dame, a much easier challenge than what Notre Dame faced on Monday night. And I think we could all see that, but I wouldn't say it was an aberration. I would say what Nebraska can do is it can say, this is an example of how Nebraska rose up and Nebraska played up a notch, coming off of a terrible loss, a 56-7 loss the week before at Indiana. And Nebraska showed that in the right moment, it can compete with absolutely anyone.
I think it's a good example of that, and it's a good example of, if you're the Ohio States of the world, your season can come crashing down in a hurry. And if you're the Nebraskas of the world, you can rise up and you can, destroy the party a little bit here. Like, we've been waiting for Nebraska's breakthrough win for a long time. And every time Nebraska plays one of those games, whether it's against Ohio State or a contending national champion team like Michigan or whoever else is in between, it's like, Oklahoma, for those couple of years they were playing Oklahoma in the non-con, like, oh boy, they're going to get blasted. Can you just keep it close? And I think,
sometimes
Nebraska,
they do. It's
Nebraska. Yeah. Exactly. Nebraska played Oklahoma close in 2021. Nebraska has played Ohio State close a couple out of the last 5 or 6 years now. So, I think that's a really good lesson. You still got to get over the hump for it to count, but you were capable of playing in and winning those games.
Nebraska almost threw a wrench into the entire college football season on that day in Columbus. I don't know how the rest of the season would have changed. Ohio State had already lost to Oregon when Nebraska went into the horseshoe. Does the Michigan game go differently if Ohio State has 2 losses and needs to beat the Wolverines in order to just keep its playoff hopes alive? I mean, very possibly, yes.
Maybe.
But you're looking at a different landscape, a totally different finish to the season nationally. If Nebraska, let's say if Jamal Banks gets that penalty, if that holding call or DPI on Nebraska's last drive is called against Ohio State and things start to snowball on the Buckeyes defensively, like they had in the second half, and Nebraska walks out of that game with the win, we may not be sitting here talking about Ohio State as the national champ right now, or maybe we would, because Ohio State was just that good when it got to the playoff. One thing about Ohio State that I will mention before we get to a break and then move on to what's going on at Nebraska this week, the Buckeyes on Monday night had 15 plays of 10 yards or more that accounted for 324 of their total yards. That's 21.6 per play and 73% of its offensive output against Notre Dame. So I think that's the thing that you need to know about this Ohio State offense and what the Big Ten is up against, was up against with Ohio State this year, and will continue to be next year, because Jeremiah Smith is not going anywhere, and they're going to continue to run that style of offense. They're going to get you with the big daggers. Didn't so much happen when Nebraska went into Columbus, and that's a big part of the reason the Huskers were in that game. But
happened a couple times.
Yeah, right. It did. It happened a couple times, and it looked shockingly easy when it did happen. And then Ohio State kind of went away from it. You saw that on the third down play at the end last night when Ohio State had to get a first down, or it was going to give the ball back to Notre Dame with the Irish having all the momentum, down just 8 points with 2 minutes to play. It said, all right, we're going over the top. We're just going to, when all else fails, we're just going to go back to our bread and butter. And they got man coverage. They got zero pressure. Notre Dame elected to play it conservative on that third and long play. And Jeremiah Smith came up with the ball, which he will tend to do. So that's Ohio State in a nutshell. That's everything that the Big Ten has to contend with in 2025. And the Buckeyes are back on Nebraska's schedule in 26 and 27.
When you really think about it, it's almost amazing. I mean, they hadn't won a national championship in 10 years before last night. And it's almost like they can pick and choose when they want to be like this Death Star offense. They're like, oh, we could just throw it up to Jeremiah Smith and he's going to catch it. And it took them several games this year to realize that. Like they want to do things a certain way. They want to beat you a certain way. And I think what's got caught him up against Michigan. They wanted to do that thing a certain way. And then by the time they figured that out, they were too much into the vortex. So they were full on Death Star in the playoff. That's for sure.
I really disliked the notion, by the way, from ESPN during the early portions of the broadcast after Jeremiah Smith had just 3 yards receiving against Texas, that he was just out there to free up space for his fellow receivers against the Longhorns. Like, they don't need excuses made about them. Like Texas did a good job against Jeremiah Smith. They played him physical. He didn't have a good game. Like he's never out there to free up space. Like, come on, Jeremiah Smith is your number one option all the time. So I don't want to go off on a tangent about this, but I found that laughable that was the excuse given. Like Ohio State does not need excuses made for its great players. He had a bad game in the semifinals, and he answered with a great game on Monday night and winning the national championship.
Yeah, definitely not a decoy, Jeremiah Smith. Let's just say
no. That. Yeah. All right, let's take a break. We'll come back, wrap the show up, talk about what's going on in Lincoln, Nebraska this week, as the spring semester of classes start and all of Nebraska's roster is on campus. That is next. But first, I want to tell you about Prize Picks, America's #1 daily sports fantasy app with more than 5 million active users. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because all you do is pick more or less on a 2 to 6 player stat projection, and then you watch your winnings roll in. Right now, you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct selections. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, so you stay and play, even if one of your players gets injured. Here's how it works. Pick a player, you look him up. Maybe you're thinking about Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes this weekend in the AFC Championship game. There's going to be a number assigned to that player. It could be for that player's passing yards. Maybe it's 268 yards. You pick more or less. Then you watch the game. If you win, you count your winnings. Just set your lineup, sit back, and watch things happen in your favor. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONCollege on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Okay, welcome back. Final few minutes of this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I am Mitch Sherman coming to you from my basement in the western regions of Omaha. Connor Happer is in Chicago for the Tuesday night Creighton at DePaul broadcast. He will be on the radio call on 1620. Give him a listen, see how Connor does filling in for the on the mend John Bishop. Some programming notes from us. We'll be a little bit later than normal with the show on Wednesday. Connor's going to be traveling back home in the morning, so look for it around midday. Also, Wednesday night in Omaha is the Outland Trophy Banquet. Kelvin Banks from Texas, the esteemed offensive lineman, will be presented with his Outland. But locally, this event has a strong Nebraska flavor. Matt Rhule and Troy Dannon will be there. Former Nebraska defensive coordinator Charlie McBride will accept the Osborne Legacy Award. McBride is in the state this week. And Nebraska's senior award winners, that would be Ty Robinson, Ramir Johnson, Isaac Gifford, John Bullock. They will all be honored at the Outland Banquet as well. So on one of our shows this week, in recognition of those honorees, we're still working out the details on this, Connor. We're going to hand out awards for the 2024 football season in Lincoln.
Ooh, love it. Yeah, exciting. I think you and I were both part of the voting committee on the Nebraska Senior Awards, but we'll go a little bit more in depth on that. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so. We need to come up with some categories, do something creative. And find our favorite moments, our favorite plays, maybe something where things bottomed out. I don't know. We'll sit down and discuss it and get you a full episode on one more look back at the 2024 football season before we move full steam ahead into 2025. So let's finish up the show with some conversation about that. What is going on as Nebraska players report this week? Saw some video from Lincoln pushed out on Monday with players doing community service on MLK Day. Kind of the normal leaders or the players that you'd expect to assume leadership positions were the guys featured in the social media footage that I saw. It was Emmett Johnson, it was Marquise Buford, it was Luke Lindenmeyer. Did you see this? Did you see the little piece, Connor? I might be missing somebody, but players who were coming back who had big roles in 2024. Like, so we've talked a ton in the previous weeks about all of the transfers who were coming into Nebraska. Let's remember there are returning leaders on this team who I think are going to be the players who shape things starting now on Tuesday. Classes begin, and they've got a few days to get acclimated, and then they're going to be rolling right into to winter conditioning and mat drills.
It's a super fascinating blend. Just when you have the chance in late January and going into February to look at it from like a 40,000 foot view, the roster. You know, we've talked about it in a little bit more micro sense over the last several months, but it's a fascinating blend of people on the roster. Like you said, a lot of guys who have been around for a long time and have played a lot of snaps. A lot of guys who were originally brought here and recruited by Matt Rhule who are expected to jump into playing time. A lot of transfers, old transfers, young transfers. I mean, so it'll be fascinating to see how it comes together over the next several weeks and where some of that leadership goes, and then ultimately who's dependent upon for snaps and stuff like that. But it is quite the blend of a roster. There's no doubt about it. It's a melting pot.
So Teddy Prohaska was the other guy who was featured
There you go.
In the video from Monday night. Interesting in his own right. Teddy coming back from another major injury, and he's right there. He's in the mix. He's with this team. We'll see about his ability to contribute on the practice field and what he's able to do. But there's a clear indication that he wants to be part of Nebraska football on the field in 2025. So that's interesting. It's a development. Not necessarily unexpected for the Huskers in the offensive line next year, but the big question is, can Teddy Prohaska stay healthy? Is that something that Nebraska can expect? And we'll have plenty of time to dive more into that and all things offensive line related for the Huskers, which is a topic that we like to explore. So what's pressing right now? It's January 21st. Nebraska still doesn't have a special teams coordinator. That's the obvious one. When is Matt Rhule going to roll out his special teams coordinator hire? Any thoughts on that, or what else you feel like you need to want to know about Nebraska moving forward toward February?
You know, it's funny. I haven't even really thought about that. The first priority for everybody was like, all right, well, we got to move Ed Foley out, and then nobody thought about what was supposed to happen next. Which I assume Nebraska is going to hire a special teams coordinator. So, I think people are probably past the point of like, here's who it should be. As long as they figure out something better, I suppose, than it was before. Tackle. I mean,
it's kind of odd. I mean, there's only as of yesterday, there were only 6 teams in football that were still playing, 2 in college and 4 in the NFL, and for it to have been as quiet as it has, is the next special teams coordinator at Nebraska a part of one of those coaching staffs? I don't necessarily see like a slam dunk candidate there.
I don't either. So I think that's what everybody assumes when it gets, dragged out, but I'm not sure one way or the other. Maybe they were just waiting to interview a candidate or two who could come from any of those staffs. So yeah, that one's sort of just on the back burner right now. And then there's still tackle. I mean, Nebraska lost out on Shiaz Pete to Kentucky. We thought it was Michigan, and then it was Kentucky who came in late. So I think Nebraska's
revenge for the Wildcats for all that Nebraska did to its receiving core in December.
Indeed. So there's the player to be named later in that trade. So there's a few things, just like big picture in that regard. But you've answered a lot. You've addressed a lot of the needs in the beginning part of the offseason here.
So we'll finish with this, and as players go to class today, based on what we know, and I will say this is probably not the full story. The roster includes 133 players. There are 98 returning players that we know of, and 35 newcomers. That number is more set in stone. 15 transfers, 20 who signed with Nebraska in early December. So if it's actually 98 players who are back, then you're sitting at 133 today. You have to get to 105 by the beginning of training camp or the beginning of the season. and that would mean 28 need to be subtracted from the roster, which is quite a large number here in the 2025 calendar year. I don't think the number's quite that high. I don't think it's quite 28. I think we'll see some names, some lesser known players who just aren't there on the roster when it's updated, presumably this week or very soon before the end of the month on Huskers.com.
Yeah, that'd be my guess as well. And I don't know, 28 seems like a lot, but I don't know. It won't be that difficult, I don't think, for Nebraska to get it down closer to that number. And then they'll probably be a little over it when spring ball rolls around, and
For sure.
then you can kind of go from there as well. So yeah, I don't know. It's the 105 thing is not necessarily a concern as to whether Nebraska is going to get to it at this point. I just feel like
they'll get there. It's not a concern about getting there. I think it's a stressful thing for the coaches just because of the the feelings they have for the players who aren't likely to be a part of this. And there will be unexpected developments as we get through the spring. There's another week with the portal open. Nebraska will be active in a lesser role in the portal in April and May. So lots to look forward to. Thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Craig puts the Big Ten first. All the reaction from Ohio State's national championship will be a part of the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Find that on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.